Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm your host, as always, Ben Thomas. We're talking energy and AI, and that only means one thing. It's time for Casey Werth and I to have a conversation again this year. I feel like this has become sort of a de facto annual tradition, and this year is no exception. Casey, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny being on the floor at DTech. It feels sort of like a high school reunion. Current colleagues, ex-colleagues, future colleagues all getting together and saying hi to each other every year.
Yeah, well, it's funny too. My first DTech was actually about 5 years ago, and I come from the world of installed technology, and now sort of that idea has permeated every major industry, and uniquely the energy space has welcomed me and not shunned me as some outsider who isn't on a line every day. So it's good to be welcomed by the community, and you've been part of that, so I appreciate that.
My pleasure, our pleasure. It's good to have you with us.
Well, look, Casey, I think every time we talk about this, the world looks different. And part of the reason for that is because technology changes a lot of things quickly, but I would say probably the main driver of that over the last few years is sort of the innovations happening in AI and machine learning and things like that. And ironically enough, IBM probably most closely associated with being such a pioneer in the industry with Watson back in the day. And we can make jokes about Watson playing Jeopardy and chess and all those things, but the reality now is that same sort of idea and that innovative spirit has permeated into industries, whether it's the skilled trades, the B2B world, and now is serving folks in a whole unique way. Tell us a little bit about what's happening at IBM in that world of automation.
Sure, yeah. No, I would agree, and it is, it certainly continues to be the tagline of this event, and certainly dominates a lot of client conversations. I'll start off with a figure that I think characterizes kind of where we are within our industry. In IBM, we have the Industry for Business Value, which is our internal research organization. We did a CEO study. We do it every year. Of course, last year there were a lot of questions about AI. Funnily enough, the energy sector CEO population had one of the highest expectations of value from AI across all sectors. I think we cut it by 18 to 20 sectors, and was in the least mature in terms of adoption, which I don't think is surprising for anyone, but it of course, it exposes that high expectation and I think excitement, and probably belies a feeling of there is disruption coming or there is new expectations coming. However, and we're looking for tools, but then of course all the traditional complexities of our sector that may slow adoption continue to be there. So where we're looking at bringing AI into, first of all, our product portfolio, and then with our services portfolio, how we're engaging in the sector, is obviously there's power in LLMs, and there's been a significant amount of investment in the technology that drives large language models. However, I think a CIO I met with said it best, like, not everything needs a chatbot.
Right.
So how can we bring language capabilities into more of the operational processes that our sector is focused on, of course, that are critical for delivery of power, water, gas, et cetera, but still drive critically quantifiable business value. We have done 2 years of POCs now across the sector. I think we're in a year this year of 25 of especially financial leadership and senior leadership in companies saying, we need to see economic value. We need to see impact. POCs are cool. Chatbots are neat, but where are we going to drive the needle here? And so we're looking at infusing across our portfolio those sort of capabilities with an eye towards that business value.
Casey, it's an interesting point you bring up, the world of utilities, right? Because it is really what separates first world countries from third world countries, right, is the availability of utilities. But part of that means that it's slow to change because it is critical infrastructure. Now, certain utilities, whether it be folks like fiber and connectivity, tend to be a little bit more receptive to change. But energy, it becomes difficult, right? You break it down into subsets, right? There's sort of the main players in industry, and then you break it down. There's more rural co-ops, communities, things like that, which sort of are that bottom line drip. But what are some of the reasons that folks are really adopting at scale AI technology, right? You mentioned sort of ROI and value and things like that, but what are some of the use cases and reasons that folks are adopting the technologies?
So there's a lot of ways to answer that question. I would say, maybe I'll give you just a couple discrete examples. I think so if we look at global, we have some of the complexity around, well, I'll back up. LLMs are really good at talking to people and reading things, language driven. An initial obvious use case for a lot of utilities to start out with was within the customer space. and either allowing for call deflection or things like that. We have some complexities there with the U.S. markets compared to deregulated retail markets in Europe, where there is higher or less business value to doing that versus impression by PUCs about is someone on the phone to pick up the phone. So it's an easy place for a lot of utilities to start, but then the payback is sort of negligible depending on the regulatory structure. Public data, public documents, things that have low stakes from a data sensitivity is a place that a lot of utilities I saw get started. Yeah. Every utility has processes, workflows that need to understand or expose regulatory documentation to either internal users or constituents when it comes to permitting or other things like that. All of that's nice, safe, public data. It's indexed by Google. You can use tools like a GPT or other to go get that and then either expose it internally or externally, but it's low stakes from a data security. I saw a lot of utilities start with that, even their own .com presence, improving the search functionality. I mean, it's something you can do in minutes, literally, by applying a RAG use case to it, but it improves user functionality. It's a nice story to be able to explain with the commissions, et cetera. Here's what I'm doing. But now I think certainly what we're trying to invest in capabilities and also engage with clients on is, I'll give you an example of not even a generative use case, but a machine learning program we did where we were looking at how can we better help a cooperative call the peaks of their daily usage, because it's critical that if they're going to call a DR event, there's significant cost or cost avoidance. Right. And so, if this project can be completed and it's in production, and we'll just say it was less than $1 million for the whole thing in, and within the first year they were looking at $20 to $30 million of avoided cost.
Right.
It's not a chatbot. It's just good math that's bringing data together to do a better predictive model that is saving significant ROI. So if we take that to any CFO in the industry, that's just a slam dunk from an ROI. So I think that's where there's a broad spectrum of, I'll get another example. What we're doing with Maximo within our portfolio is taking the power of an LLM, which of course there's a lot of investment in that capability, but pointing it now at historical ticketing data to try to determine better why did something in the field fail. Because a lot of times those notes are not well written, right, or people use language that's not the way that the system is anticipating. A fun anecdote from a VP I met with said that when they provided their field teams a drop-down menu of failure causes to pick from, the last option was other. You can guess 82%. Yeah. We're all picked other. So what do we do with that information? We can't drive toward predictive modeling. So we've now brought that into our suite to allow for look back of ticket data to try to do better classification. That's another way of saying we have this really powerful language-driven capability, but I want to point it at an operational process where the real value for our clients is.
Well, it's interesting because you and I have talked a little bit before, right? I think that because the word or the phrase AI is so prevalent, it sort of means a lot of different things, right? I think the easy place for folks to go is LLM, right? Because it's the most sort of consumer-facing side of the technology. And then you've got, okay, there's that next level, the proactive, predictive, hey, how can we better solve this? And then we really have stepped into a new era of agentic AI, right? Now, I don't know that we're fully there from an adoption standpoint because there's a lot of folks rolling that out for the first time and it's a little bit new. What are your thoughts on it? And how are those applications from an agentic AI standpoint being utilized in energy? Yeah,
this is a topic du jour. I got two comments here. One is within IBM, we talk a lot about our client zero story because we've, of course, for several years been applying tools internally. Myself as a leader of a team, my first stop for HR transactions functionality is a chatbot. And we've driven a lot of corporate back end or back office, however you want to describe it, functionality through a chat engine first. Not like an IVR where at the end we end up with a person, but in a true agentic AI fashion where it has hooks into the back end and you can complete a transaction through that interface.
There's a full outcome, yeah.
And so I don't need to go into success factors and figure that out. I can just speak to the agent I have and it will go complete the transactions I need. And you'd be surprised how many transactions, meaning from a governance perspective, hire, fire, equity, raises. I mean, all of these things are available through that chat interface. And so we try to bring those forward to clients as examples of this is what we've done. This is the lessons we've learned from a it's not an insignificant thing to build out the governance around that to allow that chat engine to be doing those sort of sensitive processes. But once you've done it correctly and you've tested it and let that loose, you can have some significant efficiency gains from an operational perspective. The other thing I think, going back to the floor as I walk around and look at the messaging of the vendors here, is I think we're going to be in an interesting place maybe end of this year, early next, where a lot of the vertical package applications that we sell will all have agents inside. Yeah. And so we've moved from pick one LLM to run some things in your workflow or your software portfolio, and now we're going to have a portfolio of agents, all who are trained on their one task, but then need to be communicating, which is a whole new opportunity for our clients to figure out, because then you're going to be looking at the orchestration of agents across workflows. I mean, already we are really good at deploying packages and then integrating at a data level. Now we're going to be deploying packages and integrating at an agent level.
That's kind of awesome. No, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because normally, look, you and I typically sit in the office style world, right? Where the HR transactions and stuff like that are kind of commonplace for us. But this application, when we take it to the world of energy, right, is proactivity, maintenance, it's service termination, it's outages, it's all these different things. And I think, in my mind at least, this is my opinion, that our industry, though we have a massive interest in AI, we haven't been able to make that logic jump yet between the, hey, this is nice for our sort of internal practices, how do we take this out to the field, right? And you guys are doing a fantastic job of bridging that gap, right? Because at large, folks don't really know where to go, right? There's a lot of service providers. You walk around the floor and you see folks that sound like they do the same thing but do really nothing comparable. And there's not a lot of people really willing to sit down and say, look, let me actually ask about what you need, because you may not need agentic AI. You may need a maintenance system, or you may need to see that, hey, your ticket rate increases in the summer because your AC systems are all failing. Well, hey, how can we figure out, how can we work with a local installer HVAC partner with that? Yeah. Stuff like that, right? And that's really important to, you start talking about co-ops, munis, rural applications, things like that, which I'll ask about in a second. But, talk a little bit about how you guys are sort of bridging that gap between the, hey, we've got the want to, and we've sort of got some of the stuff on the internal side that we're using, but actually taking it and making it practical. Yeah,
this is, I think, a really key step in the maturity or the transformation of our industry within the utilization of these tools. And it's exactly the point you made, which is not everything needs a chatbot, not everything needs an agent, but to drive the understanding of how we transform a process, you really need, and I've seen this in a couple of places and I've seen the alternative that I'll describe, but you need, from a leadership, the pairing up of those individuals in the organization who really understand the actual process, be it a field or back office or operational from a market making or network management perspective, and then the individuals who understand the software that underlies that process. And bringing them together, not in a large team of 40 or 50 where everybody has a different opinion, but to understand if we inject within that software process a differentiated AI or other technology, how do we compress the process? If compressing is the right thing, or do we expand the process? But to be able to define the value within the discrete process through the injection of a new technology. It seems obvious, but I think that the first exuberance about this new technology, and then now the, let's be careful, in those two, we've ended up in a lot of organizations with very large groups of executives talking about a lot of ideas of use cases, as opposed to just getting a few people who really understand, this is what we're trying to get done. And this is the thing that supports it from a software. And if we, in spot A, B, and C, injected new technology or new insight into it, I could squish that down 50% and that has business value. That's the conversation needs to be happening. Right. And then maybe it doesn't need it. And maybe we just need a process change. And then we move on to the next use case where we don't need to bring technology into it. I mean, I was personally involved in several of these sort of design thinking or POC, whatever you call it, type exercises with some clients where we had some great ideas for that's a Gen AI use case. And when you go from A to B to C to Z to Z, you realize, wow, we've saved John 8 hours a month.
Yeah.
I don't think that's really the use case we were looking for. That's going to, that's going to be on the top of the board charts. So then you either go back to zero or you say, that's great. That process is kind of optimized. But you need to go through those steps to finally get to the realization of this is something that we can fundamentally transform, or this isn't the right place.
Well, what does that starting process look like, though, right? So assume I'm a utility or whoever, and I've identified, let's call it 2-3 use cases. Yep. You know, say I'm reaching out to you, right? How does that conversation start?
I mean, the example we did, honestly, this had pretty senior sponsorship from a CEO of an organization we work with, and he had his ELT together in one room, and we did about 3 hours on not a 101, but maybe a 201 level of this is what AI, this is the sort of capabilities we have, this is how to think about it. And then they went away and came back with, you know, a Christmas list of, I don't know, could we do something with this? And then we looked at that as a group with the IT team, and we picked 2 or 3. And then we said, okay, we're going to go chase these down, and we see what we end up with. Yeah. But it really started with that senior sponsorship of saying, I want everybody in the room, go read some books first. And this is the individual I'm thinking of did do that, literally bought books for the ELT to say, I want you to be educated on what this technology even is, and then come with ideas. And they can be crazy, or they could be very, you know, high stakes, low stakes, whatever. We'll pick 2 or 3, and we'll go figure out, you know, how we get there. And one of them ended up being that use case I described. It's not Gen AI, but it was just some really good Python script that drove a great outcome. And another one was bringing in chat capability into a workflow. Yeah. So
I love hearing about these use cases with more enterprise application, but I think one of the cool things that I love about shows like DTech is that it also loops in the munis, the co-ops, the folks that are really those more rural providers, right? And we can loop those people into the conversation with AI as well, right? Because it's actually a great equalizer in a lot of ways. It opens up a lot of doors that they didn't have access to from a scale, dollar standpoint, things like that. What specifically are some of the use cases that you're seeing in more of those rural and maybe outside of the core nucleus, big city use cases?
So it's funny, I gave the keynote on AI at the NRECA CEO close-up in January and had a lot of conversations after the talk and then immediately thereafter at the rest of the event. The best example I can think of, and I'll give a shout out, is to Dairyland. They have built an internal GPT instance that they've basically exposed their entire, a governed and hosted GPT instance, but they've built out capability for full searchability of RAG use cases across their, within bounds, their enterprise data set. I haven't seen a large IOU do this for many reasons, of course, things. But to your point, sometimes these smaller organizations are sprinting ahead and experimenting faster because they're just looking, can I get value out of this? Yeah. And they have organizational structures that are a bit more nimble and allow them for that. And I know that they spoke at the NRECA, and I'm forgetting the gentleman's name, so I'm sorry, but we can put it in the notes. But he also spoke at the EPRI conference too. I was very impressed with sort of their, hey, let's just go give it a shot and see what we can do. And now they're looking at integrating more of that capability into some of their actual processes. But the first question was, let's just get searchability, which I think was really, innovative for, to your point. I think there's some maybe an unfair characterization of maybe they aren't as advanced, but actually I see some of those organizations moving faster sometimes.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Especially the agility allows people to sort of try and buy and do things quickly, right? And save the procurement process. And my natural thought is, well, hey, let's use our business case here at market scale. We work with clients in all sorts of different places, but onboarding, right? Let's say we have a use case for onboarding. Well, hey, I could build out a GPT and I could build out some of these things to create some automation. How do you know you're at the point that says, hey, we actually probably need to really look at an enterprise solution for this versus, hey, let's attach this, $25 a month plan to Chat GPT or whatever. How do we know to make that hop, and how do we probably reach out to do that first step?
Yeah, this is where I may contradict myself when I say maybe we don't need these big, large teams developing all the strategy, et cetera. But when we start to move towards the utilization of some of these technologies with a higher sensitivity of data and or processes, it is very important for an organization to, at least within the governance framework at a corporate level, and of course within maybe even discussions with their auditor, because fundamentally I think a lot of utilities, especially utilities, have not gotten to the point of engaging with their auditor on, here's production chat functionality, because it's not to that point yet, but it will come. And so within that discussion on areas to apply the technology, of course there needs to be a lens of do we start with lower stakes like public data that doesn't have sensitivity, et cetera, for us to understand how we implement and then learn from those experiences as we move towards higher stakes use cases? What are the things we need to be building from an infrastructure around governance, drift, bias detection, et cetera? And these are sort of higher level processing or higher level considerations of utilization of this technology. That is, and for every organization, it's a different tipping point, right? But for sure, it is, I guess there's two ways. It shouldn't be an inhibitor of progress, but it should also be a consideration of there needs to be a point where we need to stop for a second and say, what have we built around this just to ensure that we understand where we're going, what data is being leveraged, and what are the outcomes, and do we understand? Because I mean, there's some fantastic analytics being run, and I wouldn't use names, but I mean, I've spoken with clients who basically have said, we have a machine learning model that some really smart folks built several years back, and we use it to determine our load growth calc, but we can't explain why it says that to the regulator.
Right.
So then we almost need to back it into an Excel sheet to be able to, this is the sort of stuff that you want to get ahead of.
Right.
If we build it with guardrails and with governance when we apply things, then as we move forward, we can be able to tell the narrative of we started here, we ended up here. That's the number we got. This is where it came from. So trust it. Yeah. Right. That I think is obviously in our sector critical.
Well, especially too when you start to wrap in exposure of customer data, of all those things. You've got GDPR compliance, CCP, all those different things. Those have to be built into your workflows, right?
Yeah.
Because heaven forbid something sneaks through. That'll be the one use case where somebody likes to come back and say, well, hey, how'd you do that? How'd you share that? Who did that come through? And then there's your lawsuit, right? It becomes, I guess, an enterprise application the second that you start exposing data that is sort of more mission critical.
Exactly. And, you know, and it's a starting point, not necessarily, I mean, some entities in our sector, but I know also telcos and folks in the insurance sector, there's some significant investment that's been placed in a governed chat function from a customer interface. And now with the capabilities of Gen AI, where I think a lot of those folks, and I think our utility clients can look at getting started, is if I already have a very well-defined, bounded, sort of deterministic AI model that I allow to communicate with my customer, I can get the benefit of Gen AI from an internal-facing CSR screen, but maintain my very secure, governed interface so I don't get a hallucination speaking to a customer and say, oh, the power's coming on in 2 minutes when we're not sure. And this is, you're still getting that value add from, you know, a bot or agent being able to provide extra data to your CSR to improve the interaction, but also ensuring that you're not exposing either inappropriate data or inaccurate data.
Yeah. Well, Casey, we'll land the plane with this. I normally ask folks to pull out their crystal ball at this point and give me the projection for 5 to 10 years down the road. I'm not going to do that today because you probably have been asked that question about 35 times just today alone. I want to talk today. There are folks who want these solutions today. How can people start today, and how do they reach out to you? How do they say, hey, this is a use case I have. How do we roll this out today?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say that there's 2 ways to start there. One would be picking your model that you prefer from your platform of choice, if it be a hyperscaler or directly going and getting a model off a place like a Hugging Face or other, picking a very low stakes, low security sensitivity use case, and just go get started. If a client hasn't started with that yet, I mean, even literally just deploying a chatbot to do a search functionality on their website, we could do it in literally 15 minutes. Just to see what happens, and then using that as the stepping stone to move forward. But starting again with those low stakes data, that's a very easy thing. I think most probably have started that, but honestly, I think some haven't because they're still discussing how do we, what do we. And the second would be engaging your vendor base to really understand ahead of when everything ships in the box, what will you be providing me from a capability that's beyond what I'm used to, so that first you can understand. Well, I mean, these are not insignificant investments in software. And there's going to be a lot of in-the-box capabilities that our utility clients are going to be able to benefit from. But I think it's incumbent on all of us on the vendor side to be engaging ahead of time to say, this next version is going to have all this capability that you will fundamentally change the workflow that this thing supports. And for you to get value, you need to understand how it's operating, et cetera, because the next one will be the orchestration of all those things. So I mean, certainly I've engaged with several of our clients on exactly this topic. What will come in the next version of Maximo or the next one, so that they can anticipate that and then also be prepared when the functionality is there to get value.
Well, look, Casey, I'll tell you, it's a rarity these days that you and I are both in Dallas at the same time. So I appreciate you making some time to stop by, come hang out in the studios. And look, we got to find a way to get you back more often. I don't know. We maybe had to do this 2 or 3 times a year, because I say this in not in jest. There are very few folks who are willing to have conversations at scale like you, right? And even if that means, hey, go with another provider, there's a better use case here. There are very few folks that are willing to have those conversations and have the knowledge and understanding, not only personally, but as a company with IBM, right? With your history and all those things as well. So giant appreciation of gratitude from me. And thanks so much, I know, to our viewers who are watching and saying, I had that exact same question earlier this week, and now it's answered. And I know that those folks are gnashing at the bit to reach out to you guys. What's the best way to get a hold of either you or your team if folks want to reach out?
I'm there on LinkedIn, and please look me up, WERTH Werth, and of course my extended team. We're all happy to engage and get started.
Well, Casey, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
Great to see you.
Cheers.